And we are live. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Welcome to the Noachide Nexus, all you fine, happy people of YouTube and Google Plusville and all points beyond. I am James the Idol Smasher, and this is a weekly Torah discussion, chat, study, goof-off period where we get together and hang loose, baby. Reuven has joined us. Wayman is here. Good evening, gentlemen. How goes the day?
Pretty good. I was able to not be working tonight, so I was able to stop in. And cool. The text that we're going to discuss is awesome because it's one of the few points in the biblical literature where you get a detailed account on how they break up spoils of war and holy war and the whole thing. So it was an excellent read. And I like these kinds of things because if I'm going to come on, it forces me to actually get into it more and read it rather than just reading it, because usually I try to read every day, but with the house and all, it's been really crazy. So I haven't had much time, and you would think that simply a half hour a day, isn't much to read, but you get up and try to go to work and everything, and then 100 things go wrong at the house, or running around. It just made it really hard.
I understand. Well, Wayman, I don't know, I haven't added you yet, but I just sent you a little ad thingamabobber.
I'm not sure how I'm showing up. Am I showing up as Wayman29 or my real name?
Your real name.
Oh, great.
You want to come back?
Well, the thing is, if you send it to my Wayman29, that's my online name. This is my, like, Google had it all mixed up, and it was terrible.
There he is. All right. Cool. Well, for all you folks out there viewing the broadcast, thanks for stopping in. Please feel free to come in here. I've got the question, the Q&A, the question and answer section working. So if you do have questions, something you'd like to ask but you don't want to come in, maybe you're shy, please feel free. And if you want to send me an email, it's jamestheidolsmasher@yahoo.com. Welcome back, Wayman. The real Wayman. Hello, Rob. How you doing, sir?
G'day, mate. How you doing?
Peachy.
It's a troubled world we live in, eh?
Yeah. I guess so.
Oh, well, I know so, mate. No guessing about it. Morning, Reuven. Evening. Yes, sir, you're correct. My
Glad
apologies.
you spend your morning with us. That's all right. I've got a people.
Hey, Wayman. Sorry.
What was that? Go ahead.
No, I was just saying good morning to Wayman, 29. Hey, morning, John.
Everybody's stopping in. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Before we get into Parsha, I just want to
Go where I go.
before we get into the Parsha, there's something that I just got to say.
Yeah.
And that is, I could care less what happens in Gaza. If you want to live in neighborhoods and allow your folks to bomb Israel from your neighborhood, you really can't gripe about, getting bombed back, can you? Not really, no. And I've heard just a lot of me know Israel, poor Palestinians, and I just want to say that at this point, yeah, I have very little sympathy. If those people living in Gaza want a better life, maybe they can move to Israel. They don't like it, and I don't actually hear the Palestinians griping, or even the people in Gaza griping, near as much as I hear all the nice, well-fed white people in the media over here tell us how bad it is for people over there, and how bad those people over there are. So,
Yeah, there was an interesting story over here because we've lost a lot of people in that plane incident in Russia. The Ukraine.
oh yeah.
Yeah, so there's what strikes me as odd about the conversation in the media is how there's a lot of empathy in the broadcasters and the politicians about how it's such a verboten action to kill innocent folks that are flying across a war theatre. Yet, where's that same empathy and that same voice for the children that die in Syria and in Palestine and in Israel? That same voice of distension, against the loss of innocence in another theatre of war. The question should be asked, I know why, but the question should be asked why the hypocrisy. No one gets up and challenges. Certain deaths seem to be, it's almost like they're okay. It's okay to have those deaths, yet others are not, And that's a big question mark that needs to be put to these people right in the moment when they're displaying this, almost circus-like empathy. They're parading this empathy around as if some people matter and other people don't. Well, no, every person matters. So I'm quietly pissed off at the moment, but I'll rein it in.
Yeah, I think we could become complacent because we hear about some issues so much, and then others that are newly starting, we care more about because we're like, Gaza, Israel, that's just happening again. And I think too why the Gaza-Israel thing happens. Hamas is plumb broke, and to gain support from the Arab population and the Arab states, they appear to stand up to Israel, lobbing missiles for finance. Tons of money gets financed to them, if they stand up. And Israel lobs some back. Tons of money and arms get financed to them from the United States and the West. So this whole thing, I don't know. I don't know how to resolve it. It will continue until something happens. But at the same time, like in Syria, a lot of the times the way the media projects it is for their own viewers on their own political agenda, because viewers are ratings and ratings is money. And so if they were to go against you know, the common idea, the normal stories they usually run, they could be in a world of trouble unless you're something like Fox News, where, you know, it's mostly conservative and you kind of expect that. But, you know, something on CNN, you know, they try to be, I don't know, it is really tough and it is really frustrating. So, but there is a lot of money involved in all this, you know, and I think that's a lot of the motivation.
Yeah. Well, Wayman, I think the solution lies with the people, as it always does. You know, we have to wake up and challenge. The trouble is we don't have a decent forum other than the internet to ask the questions that need to be asked, you know. Yeah, well, J-Dubs is upset with me because I, I speak candidly about things. See, I worry about J-Dubs because, you know, he won't take on his issues. He knows what they are, but he won't confront them and fix his own problems. It's kind of like the global situation in a sense. We kind of have a sense that there's a problem, but we don't fix the problem. We don't take it on upon ourselves to actually fix the problem. But anyway, it's your hangout, idol.
Do it. Let's do it.
Hmm.
Thank you, Lord, for having us here. Starts out, I'll put, there is, hello, shalom, path of Abraham. I have the link to the Parsha in the event page here on YouTube, and I can post that here as well if you're interested. It's more discussion than a homework assignment or anything like that. Peace indeed. There we go. I'll open it myself so I can see it too. All right, we are reading Matot, Numbers 30, verse 2 through 32, verse 42. And I have a few questions about this myself because it does deals with, in fact, it goes into the sacredness of a vow. And we have vows and we have oaths. And there was one rabbi online who was talking about this week's Parsha, and he said that there is a definite difference between a vow and an oath. And he kind of brought up like the subject matter. For instance, the subject of a vow is, for instance, I vow to give up Diet Coke, and the subject would be Diet Coke. But when you make an oath, you are the subject, kind of a thing. I don't know how to put that. Welcome, Prescott. Chapter emphasizes the solemnity and binding character of religious vows, and in what circumstances vows of women can be annulled by the father and or the husband. I'll just go ahead and start reading it for now. We'll get into discussion here, but just to get us on track. And Moses spoke to the heads of the tribes of the children of Israel, saying, "This is a thing which the Lord hath commanded. When a man voweth a vow unto the Lord, or swear an oath to bind his soul with a bond, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that is proceeded out of his mouth. Also, when the woman vows under, or when a woman vows a vow unto the Lord, and binds herself by a bond, being in her father's house in her youth, and her father hears the vow or her bond, wherewith she had bound her soul, and her father holdeth his peace at her. In other words, doesn't say anything, and then all her vows then shall stand, and every bond that she makes, and every bond wherewith she hath bound her soul shall stand. But if her father disallow her in a day that he heard none of her vows or her bonds wherewith she had bound her soul will stand, and the Lord will forgive her because her father disallowed her, and if she be married to a husband while her vows are upon her, or the clear utterance of her lips, wherewith she hath bound her soul, and her husband hear it, whatsoever day it be that he hears it, and hold his peace at her, then her vows shall stand, and her bonds wherewith she had made her soul shall stand. But if her husband disallow her in the day that he heareth it, that's an old translation, heareth, then he shall make void her vow which is upon her, and the clear utterance of her lips, wherewith she hath bound her soul, and the Lord will forgive her. The sacredness of vows, Hebrew is the word nader. It denotes a solemn promise to consecrate something to God or do something in His service for His honor. I think that would be the term, I swear to God. A vow is usually made in a time of distress, and its motive was the desire for secure divine help. Or it might be an expression of gratitude for divine aid received. Quote, the manifest emotion with which many a singer in the Psalter records his gratitudes to God, and as he pays his vows, shows that they must often have represented a warm and genuine religious experience. A bond, Isar in Hebrew, is a constraint to a vow. This may be called a negative vow, a self-imposed pledge to abstain from doing or enjoying something that is perfectly allowable. There's a tendency in human nature to forget in health and security the vows that were made in sickness and danger, but the rule remains, whatever a man has promised unto God, that he must fulfill. Basically, be a man of your word under any circumstance. What I don't understand, in fact, is that a father or a husband can disallow her. If she makes a vow and they hear it, they can say no. I'm not sure why.
So, for the father one, it's simple because I don't know how you'd say this. It's related to marriage stuff.
Immaturity.
So like, yeah. So like, she's not mature yet. So it's under the father's, and this also applies to the mother as well. But the father's kind of like the say in it, but he can't dictate this without going with the mother. Anyways, this is just a technicality, but it's pretty much saying she's taking on a vow like, I'm not going to cut my hair ever. So the father can be like, no, you're not doing that, because then like that might jeopardize her chances of getting married. So it's really like when it talks about the father stuff, it's more so in the context of she's not married yet. So he has to, the bounds of what vows he's allowed to annul for her is in the context if it jeopardizes her chances of getting married. If that makes sense.
Yeah, but there's got to be an underlying proviso that the father actually truly has the relationship with God, an accurate one.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So that's also a thing. The thing, if you just look at so like a big aspect is like, you know, everybody knows the concept of honoring your father and your mother. But if they're telling you to do something wrong, as Rob would say, following the bad wolf, then that obligation doesn't apply. So if your father is like, I don't know, like a drunkard or something like that, and you make a completely holy vow, and he says, no, really, all that religious stuff or like whatever, all that spiritual stuff is stupid, that annulment doesn't work because he doesn't have the authority in that case. This is in the context of an upstanding citizen. Just same thing with the husband. A husband can't annul his wife's vow if if he's a complete basket case kind of idea. But the idea of like a husband annulling a wife's vow is all in the context that we don't believe in egalitarian marriages. We believe that the women have certain powers and man has certain powers. So a man can't have sex with his wife whenever he wants, but a woman can, in certain kind of ways, demand when they have sex and when they don't have sex. That's the woman's authority kind of idea. So it's about the balancing of the relationship, not so much about the blending of roles, but the balancing of power, if that makes sense. But I don't know.
I was wondering too, really quick, I was wondering about the vow of chastity. Say, for example, if she was younger and she made a vow, or a donation of her child to the temple, like the Samuel event. You know, where the father, you know, maybe is hard labored and can't possibly, you know, give up his resources and things, even though it was divinely. Now, I would think that, you know, if he made a mistake, there would be some kind of punishment that you see in biblical stories, you know, where so-and-so said this and didn't follow through, and so the Spirit of the Lord, you know, vexed so-and-so, and this and that happened until it happened. But I'm just wondering, you know, if maybe those kinds of things can be annulled by the father, you know, where, you know, like in chastity or in child donation to the temple or things like that.
I would say you couldn't even make a vow of chastity. That would be a sin.
Because God says be fruitful?
Yeah, there's no context to not have children. And, like, if you can't, you can't, but you can't say, like, oh, I'm not going to have any kids. And if you do, it has to be, like, a very good reason. Like, you have some, like, crazy, I don't know, like a disease or something that will, like, that's, like, killing you, and you just have children. They're just going to end up dying as well. I don't know. That's a hard topic, but for sure you can't make a vow of chastity. That's for sure.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I have a question. So, to make a vow, you cannot make a vow of chastity. Let's say if you decide, you know, not to get married and said, "Look, I'm going to be celibate." Is that an issue?
Yeah, you're not allowed to do that. Again, we're talking about Israelites. I don't know so much about maybe even I think Noachides too. But I mean, it is pretty much context. But you can't just be like you can't think that's a lofty spiritual path by default.
So I got a question. The women that worked in the tent meeting, were they virgins or were they young women? Like, did they have families and just serve out? Like, how did that whole structure work? Because there were definitely women servants who worked, you know, because they are read about in biblical literature, especially in earlier texts.
Sorry, are you asking what were their marital states?
Yeah, the women who served at the tent door at the meeting.
Yeah.
Read about that. Like, I'm wondering if they were virgins or young girls. You know what I mean?
There's also women that had roles in the proper temple as well, but their ages aren't defined that I know of. I think the majority of them I heard them were elderly women, not elderly women, but older women. The majority that I heard from, and a lot of them were married to the priests. Right. But it's not necessarily have to be the case.
Well, from a Gnostic Jesus point of view, once you become aware, you know, of what God really is, then there is no governor other than, and that goes across the sexes, right? So Jesus is very clear about equality, you know, in saying 1:14. So I think, I don't know, I'd be always asking the question, is this because the state of immaturity persists. Doesn't matter what you say across all human stories. So I think it's important to understand whether there's guidance from the father over an immature child in the play, or whether, you know, if you're talking about a mature individual, male or female, you know, they should be free to make their own choices, and and bear the consequences of those choices. And this is where courts come into play, and hopefully mature people, where someone's harming another person. And it's back to that question whether you're actually harming anyone. Have you committed a sin? But I'm just wondering if there's, if some of the teachings are about the topic of immaturity as well.
Oh, I think in Judges, Judges 11, there's an excellent example of where a really bad oath is definitely forced to be carried through. What was it? Jephthah in Judges 11 says, whoever, God gave me victory, whoever runs out of my house, the first thing that runs out of my house, who would say that? What was he thinking? A dog or a pet? Or, and his daughter runs out to greet him after he's been in war for a long time. And, now he has to hold true in some way. But, that story ends where, she's like, okay, because you made that vow, I'll give myself, and that sort of thing. That's pretty interesting.
What's the vow that was made in that case?
I will offer the next person that walks out of my house as a burnt offering.
And the person who walks into his house is his daughter, but in the end of the story, she doesn't get killed. She just is celibate for the rest of her life, because it goes back to the idea of living a full life. This actually goes back to the idea of vows, or what we were talking about before. Living a full life is having. It's a sensitive topic, especially for some of us who aren't in relationships. But living a full life is to have a spouse and is to have children. So the idea of the concept of it's not good for man to be alone, or the idea of man shall cling to his wife and they shall become one, in the sense like the word echad, like literally one being, one entity, one purpose, one goal, all these things. So the idea of not being married or not having children is kind of like you're not really living in that sense.
Well,
it's a deeper concept, and that's not to say every marriage is a real marriage, though. That's to be noted. It's not saying once you're married, you're married. It means like once you have that true bond with another human being, that's when you're complete, and that's when you can really fulfill your.
Well, I think you're an effective parenting relationship when you are, as you say, one, where you're actually operating on the same page. That's really important. If you have a partnership where where kids are involved and there's inequity in your position on matters, one's strict and the other's not, and I've lived that one. It doesn't work very well. It would work much better where you're, and your kids see that you're both on the same page. So that's an important part of a successful family life, I think. It takes the way.
Don't make an oath unless you mean it.
Beg your pardon?
Don't make an oath unless you mean it.
Yeah, and there's an agreement, well, at least in front of immaturity, you want to be clear-minded in, the direction you're trying to give.
And it's also about having that immaturity. It's also having that counterbalance, that thing to keep you in check. It's like your partner becomes your external conscience in a way. So instead of you running amok, they can balance you out, and vice versa.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, I agree with that.
But again, it's not to say every marriage is really a true marriage in that sense. But a marriage is really when it's symbiotic. Definition symbiotic, for sure. Where they're no longer a separate person, but they're an extension of your being.
Yeah, but I think that's where, the partners, really understand this, the two wolf story, if you like. That's the high order, because, and there's no, they're very clear-minded about that aspect of life.
So I wonder, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that's the highest ideal, but unfortunately, when we're into parenting, not many are at that stage in life themselves, and this is why the spiritual wisdoms are important. I guess they help you get through that journey, or they give you points of reflection. as long as they're accurate. But then again, we've got all this political doctrine as well, which confuses the matter.
So I wonder why it's more directed at female or women, and there's no ruling for young boys. I mean, they can be just as immature and still make bad decisions, but yet specifically there's no law, you know what I mean, saying, hey son, maybe that vow isn't a good vow, or that oath isn't a good oath, I'm going to annul it, specifically written in the literature, in the law code,
Men have no out, do they?
No. They can be. Again, we're not talking about men in this context. We're talking about boys and girls, like underage, not married. So they can be too. Why it's explicitly not stated in the Torah is a different topic that I don't have a thing on me to explain. But there is a law decree that they're the property, I put in quotation marks, you can't see, by air quotation marks, they're the property of the parents. Like, they're their domain. So they do have the authority to do that even to the boys. Now, when it comes to a marriage, I'm not too sure if a wife can. But then again, in certain cases, a man can't even make a personal decision without consulting his wife to begin with. So even before he makes the vow, she might be able to thwart it. But I don't know, once he makes the vow, can his wife nullify it for him? I don't think so. But I'm too ignorant on the topic, really, to be honest.
But she can decide what goes on in the bedroom.
And in a variety of other places, yeah. But it's completely 100% in her control. So much so that it's the opposite of being misogynistic. It's the opposite. Men have no real control in that situation. Men, it's kind of like it kind of flips the scale in that sense. So
maybe men with that. I think the men would naturally be thinking, "Oh, wait a second, maybe I got to think about this first."
I think it might be to keep the men in check, kind of idea.
Yeah, I like the idea of the woman being the ultimate arbiter, person in control of certain circumstances relating to sex, because they're in the best position to make the best call. The male will, and we know that through history. There's a lot of, rape being the ultimate one, I guess, but there's a lot of situations where injustice occurs around the sexual act. So
it's like a power tool for men more so than women, right?
Beg your pardon?
It's more of a power move for men than it is for women. Like putting rape aside, but it can be used as a power tool.
Yeah.
Like that.
And
maturity more for men than women, I guess.
Yeah. So it seems that it would be a better justice system if women did have, were the ultimate, I guess, judges in those circumstances. They would be probably better positions to say whether a questionable event was unjust or not. And I'm talking about wise women, wise and elderly women. They give a better perspective than a wise or an elder, Although, if you have full understanding of how things work, you could probably be the judge. But we see some bad judgments by men, I think, even in court, that seem unjust. But it's sort of like if the woman says no, that should be the end of it. She should have that voice, and it should be respected in the community.
All right. Next topic is one I think that should be explored a little more online, because this is one that a lot of folks, a lot of Torah dissenters and the like to use. I don't want to say against people, but it's one that a lot of people seem to have a big problem with, and that's the war with the Midianites. Back in 25:16 through 18, Moses is bidden to smite the Midianites because they had enticed the Israelites to the licentious and idolatrous worship of Baal Peor. In the present chapter, he's ordered to carry out the command forthwith. and we are given full details of the campaign. The war against the Midianites presents peculiar difficulties. We are no longer acquainted with the circumstances that justified the ruthlessness of which it was waged, and therefore we cannot satisfactorily meet the various objections that have raised in that connection. Perhaps the recollection of what took place after the Indian Mutiny, when Great Britain was in the same temper, may throw light on this question. The soldiers then, bent on punishing the cruelty and lust of the rebels, partly in patriotism, partly in revenge, set mercy altogether aside. That's from another that's from a non-Torah-based source, what it looks like. The Midianites affected were only the clans that lived in the neighborhood of Moab. This accounts for the persistence of Midianites in later periods of Israelite history. Just to tell you what we're dealing with here, if you want to say something like Judaism's goofy, these gods that the Midianites wanted the Israelites to worship one was Baal, and at first glance there's nothing really weird about it. You have like a pillar or something like that, and you have to throw a stone. If I'm wrong on this, let me know, but I'm pretty sure this is what they were. And that was a form of worship.
That was Merculus.
Oh, that was Merculus. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Baal, he did a bunch of stuff, but a lot of it involved nakedness, not to get any details, and like defecating and stuff.
That's
really
right. Peor, that you'd have to do a number 2 on a sacred stone, and you could get your very own Midianite hot babe.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding. That's what you had to do.
I think what it stems from, like especially in the secular community, is a misunderstanding of ancient Near Eastern culture and literature. I think that once you read it in the context of the culture, it was slice and dice all over the place, with no exception. This is how things were done. And if you read, say, law codes of Hammurabi, things like that, Hittite law codes, they're all available to read, and it's fairly easy nowadays to get a hold of that and read it. You will find that similar oaths are made, similar holy war rites are in place, and that's how things were run. And a lot of this, I love this stuff. I explored this a little bit with the holy war rituals and things of the Hebrews. And a lot of that booty that's coming back, and you find they can keep certain things and they're taxed on certain things, everything they won was a holy war donation to Yahweh. Then he dealt out. If you were to keep anything from that, something very bad was going to happen to you and your comrades. You had the Nazarite order, which were holy warriors, who followed specific things in dress and what they ate. All kinds of things, and this is why I love this text right here, because it's how it was run, almost an account of here we have, apart from the belief system, we have an ancient Near Eastern text right here of how a holy war was conducted and how the booty was handed out and how it was taxed and what the deity required of the warriors for the temple. It's quite amazing.
What's the period, Wayman?
I don't know. We'll have to look it up. I'm not good with that.
Yeah, that's important. You've got to. I think it's important when you're ever reading any of this stuff is to know which period it relates to.
Yeah, that's true. Definitely.
Yeah. So, can you give me a link at all? I'm really interested in that, particularly when you mention Nazarites as warriors.
So there's a text written by James Pitchard, who had the book out forever. It's called Ancient Near Eastern Literature Relating to the Old Testament, and he goes through and he links up different texts out of the ancient Near East to biblical literature in the Tanakh and Old Testament, and it was an excellent read. And then he puts the references to the back, and he lists the time periods that what scholars think. Of course, it's always debate on this stuff through the years. It's updated and things like that on constant arguments over time periods and things. But reading that really gives an overall view of what kind of circumstances people had to live in and deal with, and even kind of religious practice that people had back in those times. So there was like prophecies and all kinds of stuff, healing, rituals, all kinds. But what I'm doing here is outside of the belief system, from a secular point of view, putting it into the grand scope of things. People charge Judaism with all these atrocities in retaliation to a lot of the stuff that Christianity is doing and being pushy with fundamentalism, to get back at them, without really understanding the ancient Near Eastern context of the environment that they lived in.
Yeah,
Judges is awesome with dice.
Yeah, that's why it's important to understand the context, because if you look from 745 BC through, well, I mean, I made this comment to Reuven yesterday. Basically, from about 740 BC onwards, the state of Judea has been a client state of empires, and he saw a period, with the Maccabees as a liberating period. Well, I don't. I disagree with that. I think that the empire just became Roman, really. The Roman guys entered the frame from that point forward. So you've got quite a, when you look at that backdrop, that Israel or Judea is really a client state to these empires, it's pretty bloody lifestyle, a pretty brutal sort of a regime that seems to be always, the Nazarite term. It's a pretty bloody sort of environment. You could easily imagine if something's religious in the context of 745 BC through to Alexander entering the frame, they would have in their psyche this continual threat of violence, and would want to, have some sort of way of tying that violent aspect of life into the religious texts to try and stiffen the backs of the people, I guess. But it seems like it was certainly a very violent world. I mean, I'm always reminded of a picture of Assyrians with these very long spears, and on those spears they'd skewered people, and that's a frieze from that period. Anyway, that's why I think the timing and understanding the backdrop is important as well. Hey, Wayman, who was that dude again? What was his name? Or did someone drop that up there? The author. Just the author's name, mate. No, lost you.
I now know that Path of Abraham's mentioned here up till modern times, Nazarites and Habani Jewry, Jewery, were the most respected warriors.
Yeah, because the idea of you couldn't be at least in their community, the Habanim lived in like Yemen and Saudi Arabia, and they couldn't. Their concept was Nazarites made the best warriors because if you didn't have mastery of self, you'd be just like a thug. You're not like a true warrior kind of idea. You can't fight a war if you're just going to be this like bloodthirsty, non-civilized, self-mastered person. I guess it kind of reflects somewhat in Eastern cultures as well. This idea of the warrior arts is not just being about killing and bloodthirstiness, but also about personal refinement. So,
well, yeah, well, that makes sense because Plato's observation about the characteristics that travel with the enlightened person really are courage, justice, and all of that. And the Nazarite, because I kind of think that Jesus emerges from a Nazarite tradition, and when you look at the Essenes, they had some very strict policies on entry. You had to go through long periods to prove yourself, and if you didn't pass the test, I think that they would kick you out of the community. So it wasn't necessarily a walk-in start-up arrangement. You had to actually live the lifestyle and prove to the community that prove your commitment, basically. So it's not just hey, hey, here, read a book and salvation's yours. You had to actually step up and prove to that community that that you were committed to the way, per se. So, and that sort of makes sense in most people, I guess, would acknowledge that living a disciplined life and a good life isn't necessarily on the surface the easiest choices that you make. But when you do make those choices, it certainly is by far a better life for you and your others. So, the discipline part is part of it, I think, undeniably. Try and get your kids to follow the good life,
Wind up like Midian.
It's the real war.
Now, if I'm not mistaken here, didn't God say to get rid of everything about the Midianites, even their spoils and their livestock? I mean, it wasn't everybody supposed to was supposed to die, and Israel didn't do that. They took the women and children and the animals for spoils. Or am I at the wrong one?
I think that's with Saul, and that's why Saul's killed. I could be wrong. I don't remember.
Yeah. So, but you have got that context of people coming in and raping and pillaging. I mean, even in the book of Isaiah, which, from my perspective, was written by the Persians, the stories that emerge from that and from Ezekiel, they talk about God, an angry God, and then they give the context of the things that were happening at the time. People were being attacked by the Assyrians and the Babylonians. Women were being raped and pillaged, but the blame was being cast back on the people of Judea for upsetting God. Where I think, in truth, the reality was that these people were, in fact, barbarians, and they were just being selfish people feeding their bad wolf, if you like, empire builders and the like. But nonetheless, putting that aside for a minute, you've still got this context of quite a violent world going on, and the people of Judea were by and large the victims of that brutality. So it should come as no surprise that would be part of the literature, these sort of violence things. And I think the art then becomes working out who's telling the true story here, who's speaking about the truth about our inner God, who's talking the truth about that. It's certainly not the Persians.
Well, I think, too, in the literature, it says once they decide that the women should not live, the women who who have slept with a man were then destroyed. The younger girls who have not laid with a man were allowed to live. I think the biggest problem that maybe the priestly caste writing this, or the deity himself, since we're in a religious setting here, is worried about, like I was saying before, assimilation. Get rid of all that stuff. You do not want to become like these people. You absorb them. They cannot absorb you. So here we bring back women. All of a sudden we marriage. Along with that comes their culture, their religion, their identity, all that mixed in with the Israeli population or the Hebrew population. That cannot happen in biblical literature. Like it was always straight up anti-assimilation policies and retaliation to other nations coming in. So, I don't, as a secularist, I don't really have a problem with the literature. I don't really have a problem saying the environment is barbaric, and that's how things were run. And, I don't have a problem with seeing the politics of it either. But, this isn't that kind of study.
One thing that's interesting is that after the battle, the warriors had to be purified. Everything they came in contact with had to be purified. You're talking about the idea. It was basically the contamination or the sickness that was Midian. It wasn't just about, you know, viruses. There was more to sickness than just a virus. And yeah, if they came in contact with their garments or the corpses, even they have to be purified. 7 days for the warriors. I mean,
So I'm wondering, maybe was that only for that battle, or was that a actual holy war ritual that had to be carried out after each battle? Like, I'm wondering, because sometimes it makes note of what had to happen in purification ceremonies after the wars. Other times it doesn't. So I'm wondering if there were certain things that, you know, had to be done after war with the warriors, or not, you know, or if it was battle specific, you know, like the example we have here. I'm not sure about that.
It was codified, but I don't know exactly when. But I know those time periods were like cool-off periods. That's how it's like written about in classical commentaries. Like after war, like you gotta. I guess it's kind of like how they used to maybe deal with PTSD back in the day. Like they didn't just throw them back into the general population right after like the kind of wars they used to fight kind of idea. They had to have this like kind of time of, I don't know. But as far as it being like required law, that I don't know. But the rules of law were codified though. I could look them up for next week.
I don't see any reference here that it's just for Midian, but it is in the same context of Midian.
How do you spell Midian?
Mem.
I got it, mate. The guys have put it up, so thanks.
Oh, thanks. Thank you, gentlemen. Rather slow. For all those out there who just joined the room and I haven't said anything, hello, welcome. We're studying Parsha Matot, which is Numbers 30, verse 2 through 32, verse 42. For all you folks out there watching in the chat room, you're more than welcome. We do have, at the moment, one space available. So feel free to stop in, say hi if you got something to say, something you want to add, question. We have Q&A open, so feel free to ask a question there. And no questions at the time. What else let's see, we've gotten the vowels made and how we handle vowels, how it's made for women married and not. We've got the war with the Midianites, appointment of spoils, which there's quite a lot on. You can read this if need be.
So I had a quick question. Towards the end, it talks about the demand of taxation on the spoils that would go to the temple.
Right.
And there were also human taxations that would go to the temple. What did those human spoils, how were they handled? Like, were they, because it's religious, like normally I would say, hey, you know, sacrificial, blah, blah, blah. But this isn't time for that, you know what I'm saying? But I'm wondering, what is the commentary that how that sort of thing was handled? So say in the text, it says, you know, send, you know, however many as, you know, taxation to the temple.
So, you have to look at it this way: the Mishkan, the Tabernacle, and the later the temples, they weren't. Well, it's hard to like make this definition in the Western sense, but they're not religious institutions. Just like how the Torah is not necessarily a religious document. So what they were the center, they're the national center. If you like, they're the center for the quote-unquote religion, the center for education, the center for the army, the government. This is what they were. They're the central meeting point of the nation. They're the capital. Hence why Jerusalem was the capital in the center. At the highest point in Jerusalem was the temple, because this was the structure that governed the whole nation, not just in religious affairs, mind you. So why all those things went there is because that was the central place, and from there everything would be divvied out. And so what you'd happen with the non-Israelites that would go there is to be like, okay, now how do they fit in back to the natural population, the Israelite population? Where are they going to go? So it's kind of like think about like better terms like refugees. You don't just like, okay, they're here, and now you go to that state, you go to that state, go wherever you want. Is they go to a central facility, they get their paperworks. In this case, they'll learn the laws, they'll learn about the culture, and then from there they'll be sent out. So like you have to look at the temple and even the tabernacle as not just a religious institution, but also a political institution.
So I understand, the distribution and the centrality. Is that a word? I think it is. But what I don't understand is why some were allowed to keep the women who were clearly spoils of war and were clearly the prize winning of some individuals, but only a certain percentage of them had to be sent in as a temple tax, because that's what it is. They're not saying send in all the women that from your spoils. They're saying send in a percentage of them. And I'm wondering what those people did. Maybe they worked for the temple, but here you have, and this is interesting too. If they were to work for temple and they were not sacrificed to the Lord, because we don't want to think that they did human sacrifice at all, but if they were not sacrificed for the Lord, here you had contamination in there, because now you have cross-cultural mixing, because these people are going to bring in their belief systems, their ideas, all that, and working in the temple complex and atmosphere or whatever. That could not happen if it's the central part of the whole community, and that could prove very dangerous. So I was just wondering if there's anything out there or any commentary on how the spoils of war, the percentage that was sent to the temple, what happened, because I have not found any,
Well, the idea would have to be, did they stay there? Because we know for sure that the monetary gains and even the food gains that were taxed to the temple didn't necessarily stay at the temple. For instance, like if you look, a good example would be if you look at the Israelite service of bringing offerings, there's always a portion that was divvied out to the priests, and it wasn't just that the priests had those portions. That meant that the priests would eat of those, that would be their livelihood, and they'd also give that out to the orphan, the widow, and the converts, the immigrants, because they were taken care of by quote unquote the state, which was the temple at the time. So we look at it again as an institution that it didn't just, they might have not just stayed localized in that place, but they were then under the auspices and under the governance of the temple. So how did that relate to why quote some of the spoils would go to the other Israelites and only a percentage would go there? I think just because there wasn't enough to go around, as far as Israelites to go.
I'm sorry. This is just simply what I would disagree with, because it's a specific number that was required, a specific number, a specific percentage. I just think it was a donation of holy war gifts to the temple, just like anybody else would be, straight up. And that would be utilized throughout, like you're saying, that I definitely agree with, utilized throughout, but a certain percentage. So it wasn't as if, oh, we don't have enough, send only 10% of your spoils, and we'll distribute that to people who have none. You know what I mean? Like, it just didn't make sense. But maybe it's just simply we don't.
I can go look it up if you can give me the I could look it up in a few books if you can give me the actual passage.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, 1 second.
We also move on to 32, the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh desire to settle east of the Jordan. They protest their willingness to accompany the other tribes until Canaan is conquered. Eastern or Transjordanic Palestine is 150 miles long. Its breadth varies from 30 to 80 miles. It is throughout over 2,000 feet above sea level, with a temperate climate and a land of health and fertility. The middle region, Gilead, bore perfume and medicine for the whole eastern world. Gilead is covered with forests, in its valleys by orchards and vineyards. Even more famous was its pasture. Said flocks and pastures have ever been the wealth, the charm, the temptation of eastern Palestine, a land of opulence and insecurity.
Okay, so the text that was in question was Numbers 31:30, where they're dealing out the taxation, levying the tax for the Lord from the soldiers who went to battle. I just love that text. It's pretty amazing to see how all the mechanics of it and how it worked. You don't get that very much in literature. It's nice.
Everything was accounted for, wasn't it? Well, yeah, one of our Noachides doesn't want to come in because of some
No, actually, I think I might know his problem. That would be because he's got me blocked. That might stop him coming in. If he unblocks me, or I just vacate it and he can come in. Whatever. Actually, I'll drop out and you can invite him in, and I would think that might be his issue.
If he's still around.
Well,
that's nice of you, bro. That's all right. That's very kind.
Yeah. All right, I'll drop out and see if that gets him in.
Alrighty. And also, Nephilim Free once in, and someone has him blocked. Tis not I.
Okay, sorry.
Go ahead, yes, sir.
So here's one take on what was it, 31:30. Again, this isn't. I don't hold by this, and I'm not going to defend it. But this is just one take. It says on one draw from 50, 1/50th of the fighting men went out to war. That's 1,200 out of 600,000, and so the Levites received that ratio as their share. The 1/500th given to the priests corresponded to the tithe the Levites gave them from the tithe they received to the general population as commanded. That makes sense. So it's just saying why that ratio is there is because it's related directly in juxtaposition to the other ratio of the tribes.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. Like I was just wondering what they did with the people. Obviously, if they were slaves, I'm fine with that. You know what I mean? Like I don't have a problem with that. Or
No, they're married off to the general population. They're probably married to the priests.
So you're having that can't happen. I don't know. If you're having captives come in, spoils of war from another culture.
If they're idolaters, for sure not. That's
Right.
I see what you're saying. The idea, how will they influence them? That's a whole like nature against intermarriage. It wasn't necessarily xenophobia. It was about foreign ideals and beliefs leaking in, which we see became an issue later on, for sure. So how is that justified? I would say based off of two reasons. A, we know for sure that if they were still idolaters, they wouldn't be kept around. So it was kind of like, I guess it like happened on maybe a probationary basis, if you could say that, to put it lightly. Like for sure not if they were still like sacrificing to their idols in the middle of the camp, that wasn't going to be going on. But I think that's why in the beginning with it wasn't ideal, and it just kind of happened, and they had to deal with the situation as it occurred. Like that wasn't the ideal to begin with.
I don't even have a problem with as some seculars seeing human sacrifice in biblical literature. I just didn't want to talk about it here because I know that you all probably don't go that route. You know what I mean? So, but just to know, I really don't have a problem with seeing that. But I was just wondering how the community of believers, read that text, in commentary. And you did a good job.
They were married off to the priests. That's how I would see it.
So I was going to look it up in my lib translation here. I have the new Jewish translation of Tanakh, Jewish Study Bible. I was going to, if you give me...
Is that the Oxford one?
It's put out by Jewish Publication Society.
But the...
Yeah, hang on here. I'm bringing it up. Yeah, it's Oxford University Press.
This one, right?
Yeah, I have it digitally. It's going to take me some time. If you could look up the commentary on that. Is that the Study Bible?
I think so. It's the Jewish Study Bible, JPS.
Yeah, look that up in there. That's a pretty good lib translation.
Yeah.
Whenever I want to know what the lib scholars say, I read that.
Fair enough. What was it? 3130?
In the children of Israel's half thou shalt take one drawn out of every 50 of the persons of the beeves, of the asses, and of the flocks, even of all the cattle, and I give them unto the Levites, and keep the charge of the tabernacle of the Lord.
Did somebody just say there was human sacrifice amongst the Hebrews?
It just oh sorry, but just to plug in, they don't really address the verse in the way we want it to. It's more of an overview. They're saying, okay, so from 25 to 30 it says a similar practice concerning distribution of booty is noted in 1 Samuel. Both cases by authors are intended to be as illustrative precedents. Verses 28 to 30, a form of the laws concerning tithing detailed in chapter 18 is carried out. And then it says, and then it goes 31:47 about the amounts and stuff. It doesn't really touch on the significance. It just talks about the divvying up of it.
So for the...
So was the previous, I'm sorry, was the previous commentary read from the Art Scroll edition? Or what was that from?
That was from, that was from the Art Scroll Stone Chumash.
Yeah, that's a pretty good text. I'm not sitting in front of my library like you are, and you're a lucky guy. I'm at a summer home right now trying to clean up, and I just didn't have access to material. So thanks for reading all that. I appreciate it.
No problem. I have more too, but I'd have to go downstairs, and I don't know.
Lots of effort.
Yeah, it's a hard life. First world problems.
So giving it to the giving a 50th to the Levites is a form of tithing, then.
That seems to be the consensus.
That puts it, because Christians like that word tithe. A lot of Christian folk. That's a good word.
Oh, wait. One more shot. This is Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan's translation. It's not really a well, it is a translation of the Torah, but it's a little bit more of his take than a translation. So like a lot of times when it's not necessarily a direct translation, but how he reads the text, he'll put down the real translation at the bottom. So he kind of like almost interweaves his commentary into the text, but not very bluntly. It's more so the idea of like, this is how he thinks the text is supposed to be read versus what it actually says on the page. Just because, you know, sometimes you can't really translate something directly and it makes sense. So,
yeah, it's kind of funny. Usually when I want to know the conservative version of it, I'll read the Ark Scroll commentary and that text. And when I want to read the lib translation, I'll read the New JPS Study Bible. You know,
yeah, you gotta balance it out.
Pretty good, yeah.
So he says on 31:30, he says he's specifically talking on where it says 1 part out of 50. This is taken as a standard for the average priestly teruma gift. Teruma is like a portion, like the priestly portion. Some say that part of the spoils must be set aside in all wars of revenge. And then it gives a bunch of sources. Although it is definitely not required in the case of ordinary wars. Again, doesn't really give us what we're talking about, but.
Okay, Idle, so that would answer a question. There are differences between rituals then. So you would have some war rituals where it would be for revenge and some with normal role. So maybe the purification ceremonies that took place, you know, like after this particular war, because it was for revenge, you know, needed to be handled in certain ways, you know?
Yeah, and there's also like wars for the sake of a command versus like wars of conquest. It's like wars for the sake of a command would be like, I don't know, somebody's like a group of people's lives are in danger, like they're on a border town and like armies are coming in, or they're being like pillaged or something, or it'd be like something like somebody was kidnapped, or you know, those would be like wars for the sake of a command. And then like wars of conquest would be like what like David did and Saul did.
Right.
So there are different types of wars. So I guess in that case there would also be different laws governing those specific types of wars.
Yeah, that'd be a good study in itself. I've read quite a bit about, you know, holy war hymns and all that, but I never got into the individual rituals for the different types. That sounds like a really excellent study.
Yeah.
Here's something interesting. This is Rashi on plunder, which the plunder, which was in addition to the spoils that the army had spoiled, consisted of 675,000 sheep. Because they were not commanded, this is Rashi here, because they were not commanded to levy a tax from the movable objects, but only from the living plunder. Scripture expresses it in this way: the plunder which was included in the allocation and in the tax, which remained over after the spoils of the movable property were plundered by the spoilers for themselves, and were therefore not included in the allocation. For instance, the number of sheep and whatnot. Just thought I would throw some Rashi in there on the subject. This is a heck of a nation they took over. 72,000 cattle, 61,000 donkeys, As for the people, the women who had no experience of intimate relations with a man, all souls were 32,000. The half that was portion of those who went out to battle. The number of sheep was 3,000 and 37,500. The tax to the Lord from the sheep was 675. The 36,000 cattle, of which the tax to the Lord was 72. This is like a really easy tax too, isn't it? 16,000 people, of which the tax to the Lord was 32 people. Moses gave the tax, in which was a gift of the Lord, to Eleazar the Cohen, as the Lord had commanded Moses. And it's detailed, you know. It's like, it's interesting how this one battle, this one war, was important enough to spell out like this. If anybody knows, was this to be an example of which to follow later, as to how we divvy the spoils and whatnot? I just don't remember.
I think maybe it was just a marker of what kind of spoils they got from that battle, and because it was such a historic point, they decided to go over how it was levied and how it was carried out. But I think, you know, following this, because there seems to be a direct system in place already, that it may had been implemented before. You know, like I don't think, because you don't see a lot of discussion about how it should be done. Like the system is already in place, you know. So I think here we got lucky. You know, this is why I said earlier I love this text, because here it's an account of everything that's there and how it was dealt out, and it's quite amazing. Much different from the Greek way of doing it, you know, and also the meaning of the spoil in Hebrew culture is different from what you find, say, in the Iliad and Odyssey about how things were dealt out.
If nothing else, it also demonstrates how thoroughly the Israelites defeated their enemies. If so much detail was given about what to do with everything they had won as spoils. This indicates a thorough and complete defeat for the enemy. And so, if nothing else, we can take that from the text.
Well, they also had rituals for when they lost battles, too. You find out in the story where, come on, help me out here, I'm losing my mind, the guy who stole the gold, where he committed a holy war crime. Not only did he pay, but his whole family and everything he owned was buried in the valley. That's pretty harsh, you know. So, hey, you lose a war, you go out and figure out why you lost it. Maybe it's the reason, maybe it's not, but they got to the bottom of it, and it was a stark reminder of what possibly could happen if you were to cross the deity in some way.
It seems to set a good example. I don't know of any other battle that was so precisely spelled out.
But it's also interesting in itself because it's a reactionary war. The other ones were kind of like, yeah, this one was kind of like almost like a fluke. Like there's no reason to believe it would have happened if it wasn't for what we read about in the other parshas. Like first it was from the narrative that the king Balak was like afraid, or he's like, oh, look at this force coming, I better deal with them before they deal with me. And we know the whole thing. He tries to curse him, doesn't work. So Balak Bilam ends up telling Balak, like, okay, these people you can't curse, they're uncursable. You can't do anything externally to get God's wrath against them, but they can bring God's wrath upon themselves. So what do? They get those women in to bring in idolatry and seduce the men and stuff, which leads the Israelites to sin, and so God punishes them. And so and so they see what's going on here. So so whether they do it in turn, they understand it. So like if it was just an isolated incident where it was just like, oh, a bunch of like, what I'm trying to say is like the Israelite command saw it as an actual act of sabotage, just a divine sabotage. Like they couldn't get God to destroy them, so what they do, they got the people to get God to destroy themselves. If that makes sense, you hear what I'm saying? So that's what they did with the women, and so now what you see is a reactionary towards that. So it was a first strike, though it wasn't a bloody strike. It was a sexual strike, an idolatrous strike, but that led to destruction of a lot of Israelites with the plague, and so now they're reacting towards it with this war. So I think it's a very interesting dynamic of war to begin with, because not only is it this is the first kind that we hear about all the spoils, but it's a war of it's almost like Chas v'shalom, not to make light of the situation, but it's almost like the war in Iraq. So what happened was, like, get all the politics and the weirdness aside, but like there was an invasion force that came in, just like put an attack on the U.S., and then the U.S. went and just fought the whole nation out of reaction to that one event. So that's kind of what happens in this, and I think it's very interesting because especially if you read like Akkadian, Sumerian, Assyrian, and Egyptian battles, you don't hear about this type of warfare happening. It's mainly 100% of the time, an army's coming in, we're going to destroy them, or we're going to go conquest and divvy up land. Not this kind of espionage, this kind of secrecy, this kind of like finding out this random act that didn't even seem like an act of war, and figure out that this whole plot against the entire nation, and then the entire nation fighting the nation against it. It's a very, very interesting dynamic. At least for an ancient text.
Yeah. It's almost like Torah takes a reactionary war, this war, almost more seriously. That's one perspective. I don't know.
Well, there's the seriousness of it. Really, I see it as those nations that surrounded Israel were a threat to God's promise, preserving His word and bringing Christ into the world. Had the Hebrews been allowed to be annihilated by their enemies, God's promise to bring Christ into the world as Savior for mankind would have never met fruition. God's not going to allow that, so nothing could possibly stand in the way of that. Nothing on this planet could possibly stand in the way of it. And so God's was determined, and had the Hebrews been destroyed, well, then from where is Christ going to be born? And what would the conquerors have done with the scriptures? Well, surely they would have destroyed them too. They would have burned them up. God's word would have been not preserved but destroyed. God wouldn't have going to allow that either. So really, there's the things that are really at stake here is the biggest things that matter to the whole world is the preservation of God's word and the coming of Jesus Christ. Those things are at stake. If you step on God's toes with those two things, and you've made a grave mistake.
Well, I also read in literature of God empowering an individual or a movement simply to run them towards his own destruction also. And it's pretty fascinating how, He used the Babylonian Empire to come in and do whatever he needed to do to Israel, and then turning around and pursuing the Babylonian Empire on his own with the Persians. So I mean, just because you're a winner and things are moving forward, you could be empowered by the divine to meet your own destruction later, definitely.
Well, God knows what He's doing, so He knows the future as well, and He knows how things are going to pan out, and how His actions what they'll result in. So God did not let the Hebrew people be destroyed utterly. He may have stomped His foot and left a remnant Himself more than once, but He knew what the product of that would be. But
the Assyrians were never fully destroyed, though. Like, I have Assyrian friends.
Well, I didn't say that God would fully destroy the Assyrians. I say God prevented the Hebrew people from being completely destroyed. more than once, and he was determined to not let that happen.
Oh, I see what
It was
you're
never going
saying.
to happen.
Like it's more of
Yeah.
a spank than like a destruction.
Well, yeah, that's what he said repeatedly in his words. He said, that he would bring this upon them and that upon them, and he would leave a remnant, and this remnant would follow him. And then they followed after the idols and the false gods, and they did it all over again. And God did the same thing. He stopped this foot and said, okay, I'm going to bring this upon you, and that upon you, and that upon you, and it'll leave a remnant. And that remnant will follow me. It'll be a new, and you'll be reborn through that. He did that. That's one of the most common themes throughout the whole Old Testament, and it was God's determination to keep the Hebrew people following Him and Him only, and not after false gods. But He never let the Hebrew people become completely destroyed, because, as I said, had He done that, the Scriptures would have been burned, and there would have been no Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I think what's interesting too, Idol Smasher, is how when they found plenty on the other side of the Jordan, on the wrong side, so to speak, they're like, hey, we want to stay here. So I think like the issue was there, like from a secular point of view, like looking at it from a secular point of view, even in Judges and with the rise of Saul, the Saul cycle, they really had a problem uniting the tribes. You find accounts where some people just didn't show for war, in the early tribal league. So they were like, wait a minute, we need to get this whole task done first and over with, because we need the military backing and support to go in and conquer the promised land, rather than letting you guys stay back here, while we're off fighting. So I find it interesting that they agreed to do it because they didn't want to be wandering for another 40 years, which is fascinating, and give the military support. But what's great is here they find a place that they really liked, but it wasn't inside the promised land. And you're reading the text, and you're like, man, what are these guys smoking? Like, it's like because you got a lot of sheep, you want to stay on the wrong side of the river. But yeah, it's really fascinating. Like, and they were allowed to do that. It was their choice, and eventually they were allotted that part. But first, they had to back up the nation militarily, and I think that was a big worry for them. The Song of Deborah talks about some people not showing in Judges. I think Judges 4 and 5. It's very interesting.
It reminds me of when some of the Israelites were kind of whining that they had it better in Egypt. Oh, why do we have to be in the wilderness? I want to go back to Egypt. They took care of us. Why? I took that, reading that as that kind of cop out.
But what's interesting about that is they really had no reason to whine. Maybe they didn't like being in the desert, but Scripture tells us that their clothes didn't even wear out. God didn't even let their shoes wear out. God provided their food, and their water. They knew they were in the care of God Almighty, and yet they're whining. It just repeatedly, this is what these people did over and over. This is why God calls them a stiff-necked people.
Yeah.
I think they had a reason to whine.
I think the people who were whining were the people maybe that they brought with them also, like from Egypt. Like, definitely there were some non-Israelis who escaped out with them. And they caused problems later, and a lot of divisions in the theology and things like that. So it could be, if my family's whining and I'm a devout believer, what am I going to do? I'm going to think of my family first. And if they're thirsty and things like that, and they forget their friends and culture and that whole thing, and they're out in the middle of the desert, I kind of have sympathy for the whiners, I guess.
I think you got to look at it from the perspective that the majority of the Torah, like if you look at it just from Shemot, from Exodus till Deuteronomy, it happens over a period of over 40 years. So if you take out little snippets, it might seem like, oh, how could they complain? It might be awesome. But if you stretch that over a 40-year period of time, it's not like they were seeing all these things we read in the text chapter after chapter in one go, like every day kind of idea. So were they justified for whining? If you look at it rationally, no. They're like, regardless of their conditions, they're still being governed by their God and seeing and being led by his prophets that they had physical signs for. But were they eating those watermelons, cucumbers, leeks, and meat? No, they're eating man. They're eating honey, like oily coriander cakes. And they didn't always have water all the time. Sometimes they didn't have water, which is why they did complain, and which is why Moshe had to strike the rock to give them water. Like, regardless of, like, for sure, like, logically, we could understand why they shouldn't complain on paper. It doesn't make sense for them to complain. But were they just being whiny? I don't know. I think they were actually generally complaining. They just didn't see the whole picture. That was a problem. That was the whole point of having them in the desert. The desert was a refining period to remove them from the logical concepts of the material world and bring them to a higher height so they can live a proper ethical life in the land and be that nation that's supposed to be the light to other nations. It's supposed to be that refining period. That's why the whole first generation was completely destroyed, because they didn't get the message. So the second generation was raised up in the desert. And what they were complaining about, I would say, there's like genuine things that I would say a lot of the people here in this group would probably also complain about if you had to deal with these things day in and day out. And you just missed the whole big picture. It's just like it happens to us on a daily basis. How many times do you wake up and like complain for the rest of the day, but you're not realizing the miracle of having food, clothing, and shelter when the majority of the world might not have that? That's living with the miracle every day. That's living with men from heaven, seeing Moshe Rabbeinu's face glow. That's seeing the tabernacle and the fire, incense, and all that stuff. That's what we see every day, but how many of us forget about that?
I agree, but exactly what you said is spot on. I agree with everything you just said. And I think also a lesson that we as modern people can take from it is pretty much what you're saying. I would just put it in a different way a little bit and say that even if God provides for us with blessings, like you were pointing out, that we're just we're mortals, and even when God is good to us and does good to us, we just don't see the whole picture, and we're going to complain. We're just whiny little sinners, regardless, And so there's one thing that can be taken from that is that even though God provides and blesses people, that we're still just mortals, and we're still sinners, and these people were no different from you and me, and if it'd been you and me in the desert, we probably would have been whining somewhat too, just because we're human beings, and we're flawed, and we're sinful. And God has the big picture. God has everything under control in the end, and we may suffer hard things in life, and God knows that. And then God didn't promise I'm gonna, you're gonna have a palace and a fancy car, and he didn't, So we may not like being, I just see it's kind of remarkable that regardless of what blessings people give man, whenever he's got an unfortunate or less than desirable circumstance, he's going to whine about it and might even ask God, why are you letting this happen? That's just our nature, I think, as human beings, as sinners.
Well, I would disagree from a theological standpoint, but I don't want to get into it. But mainly, I think the idea is, if you look at the text, not everybody did complain. Not everybody was distraught with the sins that destroyed them. It was only select groups of people. So what you do have is the unrefined. So
what you also have, though, is the Hebrew people rejecting the one true God, turning from Him repeatedly. And so, I mean, and this is the people that God had cared for a century after century.
Yeah, but it was never the entire nation that this happened with. If you looked at all the rebellions and all the times they did complain, it was always a select group of people. And then even if you had that, you had Moses, you had Miriam, you had Aaron. If you just want to take those three people, that wasn't the case with them.
Well, if it wasn't the majority
versus unrefined people.
Well, if it wasn't a very large percentage of the people, then why did God almost literally destroy the Hebrew people and leave a remnant?
Because that's how the system works. We're a national unit. We don't work on individuals. We're not a religion.
Right, because a very large percentage of the people of Israel did turn away from God and start falling after false.
100%, I completely agree. And the small group.
Then that makes my point.
Do that, we're also punished because we work. Our blessings and the curses are for the nation as a whole, not for individuals. That we don't work on an individual.
I didn't say anything about individuals. I'm just making my point.
I'm trying to explain why
people, even if they're blessed by God, people complain about it, and they're still whine about their circumstances, even if they're blessed by God. The Hebrew people were no different. God stomped his foot and left a remnant. He did this to the people repeatedly. If he had not wiped out so many and sent them in shame off into other cultures and whatnot, then why was it not a problem? How could it not have been a pervasive problem in their culture if God was to do this to such a large percentage of the people? That's my
Only,
no,
only 10%. Only 10%
I 100% agree. What I'm saying is, sorry.
Only 10% of the people were carried away into Babylon. A lot of those were the scholars, religious leader, and governmental. So a lot of people were left behind to deal with the Babylonian forced assimilation policies. So it wasn't like, and they sat by the rivers of Jordan and they wept. And Ezekiel explained to them. That's where it went from a nation to Ezekiel 18. It went from a nation to the individual. You know, no longer, you know, shall we say, let it no longer be said that because our fathers ate sour grapes, our children's teeth are set on edge.
Right. So I was trying to say is, like, I wasn't disagreeing with what you were saying. What I'm trying to say is the idea of, like, why the things happened to them wasn't because it wasn't because of their nature necessarily. It was because they opted not to refine themselves. And I don't think it's you're cursed to be like that until you die. If you choose to elevate yourself, you will be elevated. That's like all the prophets. That's like all the national leaders, pretty much. And if you don't, then you're destroyed. It's just the human story. You're not destined to do this. It's a personal choice. It completely removes personal choice out of the matter. So then you can just chalk it up as like, oh, I'm a human, therefore I'm not going to do well by default. So whatever. You're making that choice.
Well, 2 Kings 25 says, now the rest of the people that were left in the city and the fugitives that fell away to the king of Babylon, with the remnant of the multitude, did Nebuchadnezzar, Adan, the captain of the guard, carry away. That's a lot of people. That's not just a few. That's a lot.
John,
the remnant in this case is the minority, not the majority.
We have a question in the Q&A section, and I apologize if I'm late, but John F. Felix asked, could somebody reference the material referenced from the Jewish Study Bible? I was temporarily distracted. Does anybody know or
Yeah, that was Judges. Numbers 31:30. We're discussing the
portions, the divisions of the spoils, right?
To the temple, the taxation of spoils of war to the temple, and what, if anything, happened to the human side of that, like the human servants and stuff that were sent as a tax to the temple. You know, what became of those?
Hope that answers your question, John. Thanks for asking. Anybody else out there in viewer land? We have spaces open if you'd like to come and join in. If you have a question about anything we're discussing or anything Torah, feel free to leave a question in the Q&A app. We will do everything we can to get your question answered. Well, we've gone through the basics of the Parsha this week.
Yeah, that was a really good discussion. I really enjoyed it. That was awesome.
We went through the laws concerning vows, the sacredness of vows, the vows of young unmarried women, the case of a married woman who made a vow whilst single. We've gotten into the war with the Midianites, which is quite remarkable. You wouldn't think that, I think, just looking at it at face value. The expedition, we have the purification of the warriors, which I find that actually stood out. That was the one thing in the Parsha this week that really stood out, was the purification of the warriors, that you're just not... you didn't just fight a war and come home, but there was a time set aside of solemnity and purification. And that hits home with me because I kind of have a soft spot for veterans. I might not be much on war, but I'm real big on how we treat our boys, and they come home after doing some of the stuff that they're that they do, and how we handle them when they come home. I think Torah gives a great example of, as to perhaps how we should perhaps treat them. Might help them out. We've got what, 2 a day, is it? Is it 2 a day or 3 a day average American vets commit suicide? Something like that. And Torah reminds us that our warriors need purification from a battle. Reuven says he's big on the veterans from legal wars and wars involving drafts. However, I loathe the veterans from illegal wars. Is it because they signed up and did what they were told? Hired guns. I mean, I know a couple of vets who signed up thinking that they were protecting America. I mean, once you sign up, you're kind of stuck there. Believing propaganda is not an excuse for bad behavior. Well, can't argue with you there. I can't argue with you there. Talked about the tribes who would remain east of Jordan. The women and children of Reuben, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh would help Israel continue the cause and leave the women and children behind. And that's what we covered in this week's Torah portion. Now here it is. Okay, and behold, you are risen up above your father's stead, the brood of sinful men, the argument, yet the fierce anger of the Lord toward Israel. For if he turn away from him, he will yet again leave them in the wilderness, and so you will destroy all this people. In other words, the unworthy deities of these that might infect other tribes, and thus the whole nation would be shut out from entering Canaan and perish. I've noticed that they're real big on the very seed of idolatry, of avodah zorah, of unworthy deities and whatnot. I mean, the very seed in Israel is to be stomped out immediately. There's no tolerance for that. And I enjoy that. That makes me happy. And we are quiet.
I have a suggestion for a Old Testament study sometime, is to do one about the passages which refer to Jesus Christ in the Old Testament. I think that would be an interesting Bible study.
You find anything in the Haftorah? Or in the Torah, I'm sorry, this week?
Oh, every word. Every Hebrew word, there's Jesus behind it, right, Neff?
I'm sorry? Well, come again?
You're saying every word that's... I was like, if you can find something in this week's Parsha, go for it. And he says, well, every word would allow it to do so, would be a testament for Christianity.
Not sure where he's coming from.
I'll be right back. Wait a minute, go ahead. I'll be right back.
You're not suggesting there's no mention of Christ in the Old Testament?
I guess we're in deep meditation.
What's on your mind, Frank?
I was thinking while I was listening to, some of the things that was talked about, is that the language, the Hebrew language, and the English one, how much we're able to understand through English language what is really being written in the scripture.
Yeah, you'd almost have to learn some of the foreign languages, and that's what I found out in biblical study. I got into it a little bit. I know Jordan that was here learned Greek, taught himself, which is pretty amazing. And using word puns, double meanings of Hebrew words, a whole bunch of different things can totally change the text on the way it used to be read when you only viewed it one way, when you only looked at the mirror straight forward. It is really amazing. I'd like to get back into it again, but I don't really have the time now.
Hey, Idol.
Is that looking at you? Go ahead, man. I'm BSing.
No, what I was saying before, actually, and Wade was talking about it with me. Basically, the language itself of the scripture that we're actually commentary upon. I wonder how much understanding we're actually getting through, or is it just really a surface? Because I sometimes think that if we really delve into the language of the text, maybe we have another different dimension of meaning, within it.
Agreed. This one seems a bit more dry to me.
Knowing the rationale within the laws and knowing the rationale between, the meanings, and sometimes I don't know if this might be a myth, but sometimes they say, each Hebrew letter has various meanings within that letter itself, and then you have to put it within its words. The words has various meanings within its context, and then from the sentence, you get a whole different aspect of it. So it just goes on from there, and I think you get a different sense of spirituality within those texts. I remember I was watching some type of documentary where it kind of refers to a person that was writing in Hebrew, and they said that, I couldn't believe what I was writing because it's actually God, speaking to me, speaking the words of God. So it was very significant, even the person even writing, in Hebrew. So yeah, that's basically definitely what I have to say. Actually, when I was looking at the Parsha, I was more looking at the text and the Hebrew text than the actual words itself.
Really?
Yep.
My Hebrew is lacking, although I have learned some of the more deeper aspects of the language, because yeah, there's a lot more to it than just a surface reading for children.
I agree. I think there's interwoven. One of the remarkable things about Scripture, one of the things I find remarkable, is that a passage can say one thing that is clearly something easily understood on the surface, and yet it has another meaning built right into it. This is true of the Old and New Testament. I find it quite remarkable. One of the most profound ones that I know of is, if we take the names of the first 10 patriarchs of the Bible and we line them up together and add words in between them like and the, necessary to create a logical sentence, then we have the names as follows: Adam, which means man; Seth, the name Seth means appointed; Enosh means mortal. The name in languages today, names have meanings. All of you have names that probably have a meaning. My name is Evan, which means John. My middle name is Matthew, that means gift of God. And this has been true of humankind throughout history. The name Kenan means sorrow or regret. Mahalo means the blessed God. Jared means coming down or shall come down. Enoch means teaching or teacher. Methuselah means his death shall bring. And Lamech means despairing, humiliation, or to be made low. Noah's name means comfort or rest. And when we take the first 10 names of these patriarchs and we put them in chronological order, we get this. Man is appointed mortal sorrow. The blessed God shall come down teaching. His death shall bring the despairing comfort and rest. And that's prophecy of the coming of Jesus Christ built into the names of the first 10 patriarchs of the Bible. Now, the most astonishing thing is, if we take every name of every patriarch from Adam to Christ, we get a paragraph-long prophecy of the history of the world from the creation through God's ultimate destruction of Babylon, which is in Revelation likened to the world system, not just the city or the ancient kingdom.
What is
it's profound? It's a paragraph long.
So that paragraph long, which is more accurate of the prophecy? That found in Matthew, the lineage, or that found in Luke?
Well, one is from the father's side, one the mother's, right? There's
So
no
if
contradiction between them.
So then the one in Matthew would be more accurate?
No, not more accurate. Neither is inaccurate. There's no contradiction between them.
Oh, okay, I see. Pardon me. So doing your acronym that you're doing in the meanings of names, which one were you reading from that would be the prophecy? The one from Luke or the one from Matthew? That's what I'm wondering.
I'm not sure. I think probably. I'm not sure, to be honest with you. I don't know which one.
Oh, okay, that's fine. I could look.
I think we're about done with the Parsha, so we're going to cut off the live portion of the broadcast. The after party will begin. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, for everybody who's watched. Much obliged. We've got Massey next week, and God willing, we'll be here Thursday night to another Noachide Nexus Parsha reading and study, and then we goof off afterwards. So thanks for tuning in. And for those viewing, you're still welcome to come in and hang out if you'd like. Not a problem at all. Thanks once again.